if you look at the way that housing campaigns operate in the city, they primarily defensive campaigns, whereby you have campaigns then that defending their right to stay in a particular place. So it might be then an estate then who are threatened with demolition. So the campaign then is actually based around, we want to defend our existing homes and community against the estate renewal stroke demolition. So many of the campaigns are defensive. They're defending place, basically. I think the difference that I kind of tried to identify with Focus E15, which is the housing campaign in East London, led primarily by young mothers who had been threatened with eviction and displacement from the city. I think the difference there is the way that the mothers, they had a much more dynamic, fluid relationship to space. So what they did was that they engaged in a series of temporary occupations of space, basically. So they weren't rooted in any one place. They were actually quite mobile. And that's the idea then of this notion of the nomadic war machine. So they're actually moving through the city, moving to different spaces, and temporarily holding that space, temporary occupation. So, for example, they occupied the offices of the housing association, they occupied the offices of the local authority housing, homeless department, they occupied the half-empty carpenter's estate. So in all of those occupations, you have this temporary holding of space. And what basically it does then is it's what Deleuze and Guattari call is a smoothing of space. So rather than the state simply, controlling that space and blocking people off, the temporary occupations facilitate then this a smoothing of space, basically. I'll give you another example, basically. Again, if you think about the way that political negotiation goes on in relationship to housing. I was at a housing meeting the other night. It was a cabinet meeting in North London which was discussing a particular estate renewal programme. And what you find in those, and there were various objectors from the housing campaigns there, and what you tend to see at those particular events is you tend to see the way that they're incredibly staged, managed events. And the space, in Deleuzian terms, is striated. In other words, then, everybody has an allotted space within the chamber as to where they can sit. And they get time allocation. You're allowed to speak for 3 minutes. It's a sort of striation of time. So in other words, the state totally controls the political process. And it means then that the objectives to any development, they have to slot in to these allotted physical spaces within the actual network of the state, basically. The difference, again, with the Focus E15 is that basically then they were told that they couldn't go in this place, that place and the other place, and actually then through these temporary occupations they managed to break that sort of state power, if you like, at least temporarily. And in so doing, what it does is it creates an intensity. It creates, in Deleuzian terms, it's an intensity. It means then that there's a shift within the power dynamics in relationship then between the everyday people and the state itself, and basically then the campaigners then can gain a sort of a political advantage. So it's kind of like it's the way that again it's similar to a lot of the occupations that have gone on in lots of the cities, like Gezi Park, like the Occupy Wall Street, like all those temporary occupations. And I suppose at one level you could even say the occupation of Tahrir Square in Cairo. What these occupations do is they shift the power relations much more towards, in crude terms, the people. I think that what's happening in this city is that some Labour councils are essentially operating in a very neoliberal fashion. So they're totally engaged in this process then of estate renewal, demolishing estates and providing them lots of private apartments, really. But it's very clear also that there are group members, some Labour councillors, who are very unhappy at what's actually going on, because they see it as it's their people, essentially working class council tenants, are the ones who are being, at the sharp end of these sorts of processes, basically. So I think there's a sort of a process of contestation going on right now within many local Labour parties in this city, in the sense then that you've got the councils who are enacting these sorts of policies, and then you've got a more grassroots then, including some councillors who are opposing those policies. And it's not simply a kind of like a Corbynista versus Progress fault line, but I think that is an element that certainly it's very interesting. Again, if you look at the heads of some of the Labour councils who are the most vociferous in relationship to exactly introducing these estate renewal stroke demolition programmes, state-led gentrification, some of those councils, the person who they supported in the election, the leadership election in 2015 for the Labour Party was Liz Kendall, the most progress, the most Blairite of all of the four candidates. Now, what you've got then is, I think, again, because of momentum, because of like the kind of like Corbyn's election, and particularly as a result of his boost in the last general election, I think now what's happening is a process of contestation precisely within local Labour parties in London, whereby many of the grassroots, as I said, and some Labour councillors are unhappy at what are de facto neoliberal policies. But gerrymandering is whereby local authorities basically then they change the kind of like the policy, and they get in people who are going to vote for them, basically. So I suppose the classic example would be Westminster in the 1980s under Shirley Porter, and then basically, they were providing more private homes. That would mean then that more Tory voters would be moving into the area. I think generally, if you look, probably the people who are more likely to be moving in, particularly those at the very high ends of the income scale, are probably more likely to be Conservative voters. But it's interesting because in a way, given that, yes, it's the case that many of the council local authorities that are doing these estate renewal demolition programmes, some of them are Conservative, but some of them, quite a lot of them, are actually Labour councils. So in a way, they're actually gerrymandering against themselves. Some of the private developments that they're getting in will actually result in probably a greater increase of non-Labour voters, basically.